My husband looked straight at me in the divorce courtroom and smirked. After 30 years of marriage, after every sacrifice I had made to help build his company, Daniel Spencer leaned back in his chair and said, "Tracy is replaceable. There's nothing special about her." The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought he had won. Then the courtroom door opened. His secretary, Claire Bennett, walked in carrying a thick folder against her chest. The color drained from Daniel's face so quickly that even the judge noticed. I had spent months believing Claire was the woman who helped destroy my marriage. I had no idea she was about to destroy Daniel's lies instead. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had someone treat you as if you were disposable after everything you did for them? If so, how did you respond? Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this one, and leave a comment telling me your thoughts so far. I read every message. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. My name is Tracy Spencer, and for most of my life, I believed that loyalty would be rewarded. At 58 years old, sitting alone in a house that suddenly felt much larger than it used to, I often found myself staring at old photographs and wondering where everything had gone wrong. The pictures told a story that looked beautiful from the outside. A young couple smiling in front of a tiny apartment. A baby boy wrapped in a blue blanket. A modest house with a freshly painted porch. Family vacations. Christmas mornings. Wedding anniversaries. But photographs never show what people sacrifice behind the scenes. They never show the sleepless nights, the fear, the compromises, the dreams quietly abandoned for someone else's future. 30 years earlier, I met Daniel Spencer at a church fundraiser in Columbus, Ohio. I was 28. He was 31. Daniel wasn't wealthy. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't the confident businessman people would later admire. He was simply a hard-working construction foreman with rough hands, tired eyes, and a smile that made me feel safe. Back then, I worked as an administrative assistant at a small insurance company. My job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Daniel and I spent hours talking about our dreams. He wanted to own his own construction company someday. I wanted a family, a home filled with love, a life built together. When he proposed, I never hesitated. I truly believed I had found my partner. For the first few years, life was difficult. Money was always tight. There were months when we had to choose between replacing an aging appliance and paying down debt. Sometimes we skipped vacations because we simply couldn't afford them. But we were happy. At least I thought we were. When our son Ethan was born, things became even harder financially. Daycare expenses arrived. Medical bills piled up. Daniel worked longer hours. I picked up extra shifts whenever possible. There were nights when I slept only 4 or 5 hours before getting up for work again. Yet neither of us complained. We kept telling each other that better days were coming. Then one evening, Daniel came home carrying a notebook. I still remember the excitement in his eyes. "I've got a plan," he said. I laughed. Daniel always had plans, but this one was different. He spread papers across our kitchen table and explained how he wanted to start his own construction company. He had calculated costs, potential clients, equipment needs, everything. The more he talked, the more excited he became. Then his expression changed. Reality settled in. "We don't have the money," he admitted quietly. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We'll find a way." That simple promise changed the course of our lives. Over the next several months, we met with banks. Most rejected us. We had limited savings. No wealthy relatives, no investors, no safety net. I still remember the final meeting with the loan officer. The man reviewed our application and shook his head. Then he looked at me. Mrs. Spencer, if you're willing to personally guarantee the loan that changes things. Daniel immediately objected. He didn't want me taking the risk. But I knew this was his dream, our dream. So I signed. My signature became the reason the loan was approved, my credit, my financial history, my promise to accept responsibility if everything failed. I never viewed it as a sacrifice. I viewed it as supporting my husband. The company started small, very small. At first, it was basically Daniel one truck and a few local projects. While continuing my full-time job, I handled paperwork during evenings, invoices, payroll records, client calls, scheduling, tax documents, anything that needed to be done. Many nights, Ethan sat beside me doing homework while I organized company records. Daniel would come home exhausted from job sites. We would eat dinner after 9 o'clock and then continue working. Looking back now, I realized something important. Daniel was never building that company alone. We were building it together. The difference was that only one of us received public credit. Years passed. The company slowly grew. 1 employee became 3. 3 became 10. 10 became 20. Our finances improved. We finally paid off old debts. We upgraded to a larger house. For the first time in years, we could breathe. I remember standing in our backyard one summer evening while Daniel grilled hamburgers. The sun was setting. Ethan was throwing a football with friends. Everything felt perfect. Daniel wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "I couldn't have done any of this without you." At the time, I believed him. I truly did. I saved that memory for years. Whenever life became stressful, I returned to it. I reminded myself that my husband appreciated me, that he understood what we had built together. Unfortunately, success has a strange way of changing some people. At first, the changes were small, almost invisible. Daniel bought more expensive clothes. There was nothing wrong with that. He had worked hard. Then he became obsessed with appearances. He started talking about networking events, business dinners, country clubs, people he called important connections. I didn't think much of it. After all, his company was becoming successful. Of course, he needed professional relationships. But little by little, I noticed something else. The way he introduced me began to change. The pride in his voice disappeared. Sometimes he barely acknowledged me during social events. Occasionally, I would catch him looking embarrassed when I spoke. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining things. After 30 years of marriage, you don't want to believe the worst. You look for excuses. You explain away warning signs. You tell yourself that stress is affecting your spouse, that things will improve, that you're overreacting. I did all of that because the alternative was too painful to consider. The truth is that I had spent decades helping Daniel build his dreams. I had tied my future to his. I had trusted him completely, and trust doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes slowly, quietly, one small disappointment at a time. As I sat in that house years later, looking through old photographs and faded company records, I realized something that made my chest ache. Every major milestone in Daniel's success contained a piece of me, my sacrifices, my labor, my support, my belief in him. The company that people admired today existed because I had stood beside him when nobody else would. I had signed when everyone else said no. I had worked when nobody was watching. I had believed when nobody else believed. At the time, I thought we were building a future together. I had no idea that one day, the man I helped create would look me in the eye and claim I was replaceable. And I certainly had no idea that the worst betrayal was still waiting for me. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact period when Daniel began changing. The frightening thing is that it didn't happen overnight. If he had suddenly become cruel, arrogant, or distant, I might have recognized the danger much sooner. Instead, The changes arrived slowly. So slowly that I spent years making excuses for them. At first, it was little things. Daniel became obsessed with his appearance. He started buying expensive suits, designer watches, Italian shoes that cost more than our monthly grocery budget used to. I didn't complain. After all, the company was doing well. He had earned the right to enjoy some of the success we had worked so hard to create. But then I noticed something strange. The new clothes weren't for me. They weren't for family gatherings. They weren't even for special occasions. They seemed to be for someone else, someone whose opinion mattered far more than mine. One evening, I stood in our bedroom doorway while Daniel adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. "That's a nice suit," I said. Without looking at me, he replied, "It's important to maintain a professional image." I smiled. "Well, you certainly look successful." His eyes briefly met mine in the mirror. Instead of smiling back, he sighed. "Sometimes I wish you'd put more effort into your appearance too." The comment caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I knew it wasn't. For the first time in 30 years, I felt self-conscious standing next to my husband. I told myself I was being overly sensitive, yet similar comments kept appearing. My clothes were outdated. My hairstyle was old-fashioned. My opinions were out of touch. My interests were boring. Every criticism was wrapped inside a casual remark. Just enough to hurt, not enough to start an argument. It was as if Daniel had discovered a way to slowly chip away at my confidence without ever appearing openly cruel. Meanwhile, his social life expanded. Business dinners became weekly events. Then several times a week. Then almost every evening. He joined a country club, attended networking functions, spent weekends golfing with people I'd never met. More and more often, he went alone. The invitations stopped coming. At first, he claimed the events were business-related. Then he stopped offering explanations altogether. One Friday evening, I asked if I could accompany him to an awards banquet his company was sponsoring. The hesitation on his face lasted only a second, but I saw it. "I don't think you'd enjoy it," he said. "Why not?" "It's mostly industry people." I laughed softly. "Daniel, I've listened to construction talk for 30 years. Instead of laughing with me, he picked up his car keys. "It'll probably be boring for you." That was the end of the conversation. As I watched him leave, something inside me felt different, not broken, not yet, just unsettled, like a warning bell ringing somewhere far away. A few months later, I began hearing a name repeatedly, Claire Bennett. At first, she was simply a new employee. Daniel mentioned her occasionally. Claire handled that client issue. Claire organized the conference. Claire fixed a scheduling disaster. Every successful project seemed to involve Claire. Every conversation somehow circled back to Claire. I didn't think much about it initially. Companies have employees. Managers talk about employees. It seemed normal. Until it didn't. One night we were eating dinner together when Daniel's phone buzzed. He grabbed it so quickly that I barely saw the screen light up. But I caught one thing. Claire. The message was from Claire. Daniel immediately flipped the phone over. I stared at him. He stared at his plate. The silence stretched. Finally, I asked, "Everything okay? Work?" At 9 o'clock. Some people actually take their jobs seriously. The sharpness in his voice surprised me. I hadn't accused him of anything, yet he sounded defensive. For the rest of dinner, he barely spoke. After that night, I started noticing other things. His phone was always face down. Always. The password changed. If I entered a room unexpectedly, he sometimes ended phone calls. When messages arrived, he checked them immediately. Even during family dinners. Even during church. Even while watching television. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan and Lauren visited for lunch. As usual, Daniel spent half the meal looking at his phone. Finally, Ethan laughed. Dad, are you running the Pentagon now? Daniel forced a smile. Business never sleeps. Lauren nodded. Successful people are always busy. I noticed how quickly she defended him, almost automatically, as though everyone had already accepted that Daniel's career came first, even before family. After they left, I sat alone on the back porch. The summer air felt heavy. I couldn't explain why, but I felt lonely. Not physically alone, emotionally alone. The man sitting inside my house no longer felt like the same husband I had married. Yet I couldn't identify exactly what had changed. A few weeks later, something happened that made my stomach twist. Daniel came home unusually late, almost midnight. He claimed he had been meeting with clients. I nodded and said nothing. After he fell asleep, I carried his suit jacket toward the laundry room. As I emptied the pockets, a folded receipt slipped onto the floor. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the logo, a luxury hotel in downtown Columbus. I unfolded the paper. Room service, wine, dinner for two, a suite reservation. The date was from 3 nights earlier. The night Daniel had told me he was attending a construction conference in Cincinnati, over 2 hours away. I stared at the receipt for what felt like forever. My hands were shaking. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. 1,000 explanations raced through my mind. Maybe it was for a client meeting. Maybe the company paid for it. Maybe there was some innocent reason. But deep down, another voice whispered the truth. The voice I had been trying desperately not to hear. The voice that had been growing louder for months. I carefully placed the receipt back where I found it. Then I returned to bed. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay beside my husband, listening to him breathe, listening to the man I had trusted for 3 decades, listening to the man whose dreams I had helped build, and for the first time I wondered whether I truly knew him anymore. The next morning, Daniel kissed my forehead before leaving for work. The gesture felt mechanical, almost rehearsed. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I sat at the kitchen table and cried. Not because I had proof of an affair. I didn't. Not yet. I cried because something inside me already knew. The distance, the secrecy, the criticism, the lies. They were all pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. But whether I liked it or not, the picture was beginning to come together. And the woman whose name kept appearing in our lives, Claire Bennett, was standing directly in the center of it. At least that's what I believed at the time. I had no idea how wrong I was. For weeks after finding the hotel receipt, I lived in a strange state of emotional exhaustion. I wasn't ready to confront Daniel. At least not yet. Part of me still hoped there was some explanation I hadn't considered. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was letting insecurity cloud my judgment. 30 years of marriage doesn't disappear because of one suspicious piece of paper. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. The truth was much harder. I was afraid of what I might discover. Afraid of what would happen if my suspicions turned out to be true. Afraid that the life I had spent decades building was already collapsing around me. Then our 30th wedding anniversary arrived. I wish I could say I wasn't excited. I wish I could say I had already given up, but that wouldn't be true. Despite everything, I still loved my husband. Or maybe I loved the man I believed he used to be. Either way, I wasn't ready to let go. So I planned something special, nothing extravagant, just a quiet evening at a beautiful restaurant overlooking the river in downtown Columbus. A place we had visited years earlier when money was tight and dreams were still bigger than our bank account. Back then, we had shared one dessert because we couldn't afford 2. We had laughed about it. We had promised that someday we'd come back when life was easier. I thought returning there might remind Daniel of who we used to be. Maybe it would remind both of us. When I told him about the reservation, his reaction disappointed me immediately. Oh. That was it. Just one word. No excitement, no smile, no warmth. Is something wrong? I asked. No. You don't seem very enthusiastic. Daniel loosened his tie. I've just got a lot going on. I forced a smile. We all do. He nodded without looking at me. For a brief moment, I considered canceling. Maybe it was foolish to keep trying. Maybe I was the only one still fighting for our marriage. But I pushed the thought away. I wasn't ready to quit. Not yet. The night of our anniversary arrived. I spent extra time getting ready. I wore a navy blue dress that Daniel had once told me was his favorite. I had my hair styled. I even bought a new pair of earrings. As I looked into the mirror, I felt nervous. Not because of the restaurant, because I desperately wanted my husband to look at me the way he used to see me, to truly see me. When Daniel walked downstairs, he barely glanced in my direction. You ready? He asked. I felt my heart sink. Still, I nodded. The drive to the restaurant was painfully quiet. I tried making conversation. He answered with short responses. His attention remained glued to his phone. Twice during the drive, he smiled at messages that appeared on the screen. Yet he barely spoke to me. By the time we arrived, I already felt like a stranger sitting beside him. The restaurant itself was beautiful. Soft lighting, live piano music, elegant table settings, couples laughing together. Everything should have felt romantic. Instead, I felt lonely. We were seated near a large window overlooking the river. For a few minutes, I convinced myself things might improve. Perhaps Daniel was simply distracted. Perhaps once dinner started, he would relax. But then his phone buzzed again. He immediately picked it up. His expression changed. Not annoyance, not business focus. Something else. A smile, a genuine smile. The kind I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. Who is it? I asked. He locked the screen. Work. The answer came too quickly. I looked away. I was tired of pretending. Tired of being treated like I was stupid. Dinner arrived. Neither of us touched it. The silence became unbearable. Finally, I spoke. Daniel, are you having an affair? His fork froze halfway to his mouth. For several seconds, he simply stared at me. Then he laughed, actually laughed. The sound hurt more than anger would have. You can't be serious. I found the hotel receipt. His eyes narrowed. What receipt? The one in your jacket pocket? The warmth disappeared from his face immediately. For a moment, I saw something cold, something unfamiliar. Then he leaned back in his chair. Instead of denying it, instead of reassuring me, instead of apologizing, he became irritated, as though I had inconvenienced him. I can't believe you're going through my things. I stared at him. That's your response. What do you want me to say? The truth, he sighed heavily, the way a person might sigh when dealing with an unreasonable child. The gesture made my stomach twist. Tracy, you're making a scene. A scene? People at nearby tables began glancing toward us. Daniel lowered his voice. You're embarrassing yourself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 30 years together. And this was his concern, not my pain, not my questions. His image, his reputation, his comfort. I suddenly realized something terrifying. The man sitting across from me no longer cared whether he hurt me. And once that realization arrived, everything changed. Are you seeing someone else? I asked quietly. His eyes met mine. For a brief second, I thought I saw guilt. Then it vanished. What replaced it was far worse. Contempt. Pure contempt. He set down his wine glass. Do you really want to know what the problem is? The question caught me off guard. What? He looked around the restaurant, then back at me. You're stuck in the past. I blinked. What does that mean? It means I've changed. His voice remained calm, controlled, almost casual, which somehow made the words even more painful. I've grown. I've evolved. I've built something important. I stared at him, and you haven't. The words hit me like a slap. I felt heat rise to my face. Daniel continued. You still think the world works the same way it did 30 years ago. Daniel. No, you asked. Several nearby diners were openly listening now. I wanted to disappear, but Daniel wasn't finished. Look around this room. I did. Business executives, professionals, successful people. What about them? They understand how the world works. I could barely breathe. Then came the sentence that would haunt me for months, the sentence that changed everything. Daniel looked directly into my eyes and said, "Anyone can be replaced, Tracy." The restaurant seemed to go silent. Even the piano music felt distant. I stared at him, certain I had misheard, but I hadn't. He continued speaking, calmly, cruelly, as though discussing the weather. Employees get replaced. Business partners get replaced. People move on. I felt tears filling my eyes. After 30 years, that's what you think of me. He shrugged. The shrug hurt more than the words. I think you're taking this too personally. Too personally. I almost laughed. At that moment, movement near the entrance caught my attention. A woman had just entered the restaurant. Claire Bennett, Daniel's secretary. She froze when she saw us. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Then hers shifted toward Daniel, and I noticed something unexpected. She looked uncomfortable, not guilty, not affectionate, uncomfortable, as though she had witnessed something she wished she hadn't. Daniel saw her too. For the first time all evening, he looked nervous, only for a second. But I saw it. Claire quickly turned and walked toward another section of the restaurant. Yet before she disappeared, she glanced back one more time, and the expression on her face wasn't admiration. It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't love. It looked almost like disappointment. At the time, I didn't understand why. I still believed Claire was the woman destroying my marriage. I had no idea she had just witnessed the moment that would eventually make her choose a side, and it wouldn't be Daniel's. The divorce papers arrived 12 days after our anniversary dinner. 12 days. That was all it took. 30 years of marriage reduced to a thick envelope left in my mailbox on a rainy Tuesday morning. I remember standing in my kitchen staring at my name printed across the front. My hands were trembling before I even opened it. Deep down, I already knew what it contained. Still seeing it in writing felt different, more permanent, more cruel. I slowly sat at the dining room table. The same table where Daniel and I had once discussed our dreams. The same table where we planned family vacations, celebrated birthdays, helped Ethan with homework. Now it had become the place where my marriage officially ended. I carefully read every page. Petition for dissolution of marriage, asset division requests, financial disclosures, legal notices. By the time I reached the final page, I felt physically sick. Not because Daniel wanted a divorce. That part no longer surprised me. What shocked me was what he was demanding. He wanted the house, the company, most of the investment accounts, several retirement funds, and according to the documents, he claimed that nearly all major assets had been acquired through his individual efforts. His individual efforts. I read the phrase 3 times, then a 4th, then a 5th. The words blurred through tears. 30 years. 30 years of sacrifice. 30 years of support. 30 years of unpaid labor. And somehow, according to Daniel, none of it mattered. The kitchen felt suddenly too small. I pushed back my chair and walked outside. The cold air hit my face. For several minutes, I simply stood on the porch trying to breathe. I wasn't just losing a husband. I was watching someone rewrite our entire history. That evening, Ethan called. I assumed he had heard about the divorce from his father. Part of me hoped he was calling to check on me, to comfort me, to tell me he understood how devastated I felt. Instead, the conversation left a wound that would take much longer to heal. "Mom." His voice sounded cautious. "Hi, sweetheart." There was a brief silence. Then he asked the question. "So, Dad told me about the divorce." I swallowed. "Yes." Another pause. "How are you doing?" The concern sounded genuine. For a moment, I felt relieved. "I'm trying to process everything. I understand." But then his tone changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for me to feel it. "Listen, Mom, I know this is hard." I waited. "I just think maybe you should keep things civil." I frowned. "What do you mean? You know Dad." The words irritated me immediately. Actually, I wasn't sure I knew Daniel anymore. "What exactly are you trying to say, Ethan?" He exhaled heavily. "I'm saying maybe you shouldn't fight him." My chest tightened. "Fight him?" "Yeah." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Your father is trying to take nearly everything." "Mom, the company is his business." I closed my eyes. There it was, the first sign, the first indication that Ethan had already chosen a side. "He built that company." The sentence hurt. Not because Ethan intended to hurt me, because he genuinely believed it. He truly believed his father's version of events. The realization was devastating. "Your father didn't build it alone." Silence. Then Ethan said something that would replay in my mind for months. "I know you helped." Helped. As though I had occasionally organized a few papers, as though I had merely assisted, not sacrificed, not carried, not built. Helped. I ended the conversation shortly afterward, not because I was angry, because I was heartbroken. The next day, Lauren called. Unfortunately, the conversation went even worse. Unlike Ethan, she didn't pretend neutrality. She went straight to the point. "Tracy, I really hope you aren't planning to drag this through court." I stared at the phone. "Excuse me?" "It's just that Daniel worked very hard for everything he has." The words sounded strangely familiar, almost rehearsed, as though she had already discussed them with someone. Maybe Daniel? Maybe Ethan? Maybe both. I felt exhaustion washing over me. "Lauren, do you know who handled payroll when the company couldn't afford an accountant?" Silence. "Do you know who guaranteed the first business loan?" Silence again. "Do you know who spent years doing bookkeeping at midnight after working a full-time job?" She hesitated. Then she said something that revealed everything. "That was a long time ago." A long time ago. Apparently, sacrifice had an expiration date. Apparently, contributions only mattered if they happened recently. I ended that conversation too. Afterward, I sat alone in my living room staring at family photographs. For the first time, I realized how isolated I truly was. Daniel had his lawyers, his business associates, his reputation, his money. Even my own son seemed unwilling to challenge him. And I had... What memories, old documents? The truth. The problem with truth is that it doesn't always win, especially when the other side has money. A week later, I met Daniel's attorney for the first time. Not voluntarily. His lawyer had requested preliminary discussions regarding asset division. Attorney Stephen Walsh was exactly what I expected. Confident, polished, expensive. The kind of man who charged hundreds of dollars per hour simply to breathe. The meeting lasted less than an hour, but it changed everything. Because for the first time, I heard Daniel's official version of our marriage, and it was a lie. a carefully crafted lie. According to Stephen Walsh, Daniel Spencer had built his company through exceptional personal effort. According to Stephen Walsh, I had primarily functioned as a homemaker. According to Stephen Walsh, my contributions to the business had been minimal. Minimal. The word nearly made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Minimal, I repeated. The attorney adjusted his glasses. Those are our client's statements. I stared at him. He knows that's not true. The attorney remained calm. I understand that emotions are involved. Emotions. Apparently, facts had become emotions now. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As I gathered my papers, Stephen Walsh offered one final comment. Something he likely intended as helpful. Something I would never forget. Mrs. Spencer, lengthy legal battles can be very expensive. I looked directly at him. I know. Sometimes settlement is the wiser choice. I understood the message perfectly. Take what Daniel offers. Walk away quietly. Accept defeat. The drive home felt endless. By the time I pulled into my driveway, anger had finally begun replacing sadness. Not completely. The grief remained. The betrayal remained. But beneath those emotions, something new was growing. Determination. For weeks, I had allowed myself to feel helpless. For weeks, I had allowed Daniel to define the narrative. That ended the moment I stepped inside my house. I walked directly to the hallway closet. Inside were several storage boxes, old company files, financial records, tax documents, business plans, years of paperwork. I hadn't looked through them in ages. At the time, I didn't know what I would find. I only knew one thing. The truth existed somewhere inside those boxes, and if Daniel wanted to pretend I had contributed nothing to our success, then I would have to prove otherwise, no matter how long it took, no matter how painful it became. Because for the first time since the divorce began, I understood something clearly. This wasn't just a fight over money anymore. It was a fight over my entire life story, and I refused to let Daniel erase me from it. The morning after I decided to fight back, I walked into the basement carrying a flashlight, a legal pad, and more determination than I had felt in months. The basement wasn't glamorous. It was dusty, cold, filled with decades of forgotten memories. Old holiday decorations, Ethan's childhood science projects, boxes of family photographs, and somewhere among all of it, pieces of the truth. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked around. For years, I had avoided coming down here unless absolutely necessary. Life had been busy. Then, life had fallen apart. Now, ironically, the answers I needed might be buried beneath 30 years of dust. I started with the filing cabinets. Most of the documents were old utility bills, insurance records, and tax returns. Useful, but not enough. I needed proof. Proof that I had contributed to Daniel's success. Proof that our life had been a partnership. Proof that he was lying. Hour after hour, I sorted through paperwork. The process was exhausting. By noon, my back ached. By 3 o'clock, my hands were covered in dust. Still, I kept going, because every now and then, I found something important. A handwritten business plan from the company's first year. Meeting notes in my own handwriting, copies of invoices I had prepared, payroll records I had organized, client correspondence I had managed. Each discovery reminded me of something Daniel wanted everyone to forget. The company had not been built by one man. Late that afternoon, I opened a faded cardboard box labeled Business 1994. Inside were dozens of folders. The moment I lifted the first one, my heart skipped. Loan documents. The original loan documents. I carefully sat down on the concrete floor. For several minutes, I simply stared at them. Then I began reading. There it was, my signature. Clear as day, page after page, legal guarantees, financial disclosures, bank approvals. Every critical document carried my name. Not Daniel's alone, mine too. Tears filled my eyes. Not because I was sad, because I finally held proof. Physical proof. Undeniable proof. The company existed because I had accepted enormous financial risk. If the business had failed, the bank could have pursued me. Yet now, Daniel wanted to pretend I had been nothing more than a bystander. I placed the documents carefully into a separate folder. Then I continued searching. The next discovery was even more emotional. Near the bottom of another box, I found a collection of old letters. Most were business-related. One wasn't. It was written by Daniel. I recognized his handwriting immediately. The letter had been folded for decades. As I opened it, memories flooded back. He had written it during one of the company's most difficult years. At the time, money was running out. Several projects had failed. Bankruptcy seemed possible. I read the words slowly. Tracy, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. Every day I come home exhausted, and somehow you keep us moving forward. If this company survives, it will be because of you as much as me. I love you, Daniel. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The letter felt like a message from a different man. A man who appreciated me. A man who recognized my sacrifices. A man who no longer existed. I carefully placed the letter beside the loan documents. Attorney Melissa Grant would definitely need to see it. As evening approached, I finally went upstairs. I made coffee and spread everything across the dining room table. For the first time since receiving the divorce papers, I felt hopeful. Maybe not confident, but hopeful. Daniel had money, power, expensive lawyers. Yet, I had something he didn't expect. Evidence. Real evidence. The next morning, I called Melissa Grant. Unlike Stephen Walsh, Melissa didn't speak like a corporate machine. She listened. Actually, listened. For over an hour, I walked her through everything I had found. When I mentioned the loan documents, her voice became noticeably more interested. Do you still have the originals? Yes. Good. What does that mean? It means your husband's version of events may have some serious problems. For the first time, I smiled. A small smile. But it was a start. Over the next several days, I continued searching. And that's when things became strange. Very strange. I began noticing gaps, missing pieces, documents that should have existed but didn't, folders that ended abruptly, records with unexplained absences. At first, I assumed I was imagining things. 30 years generates a lot of paperwork. Maybe things had simply been misplaced, but the more I searched, the less convincing that explanation became. One afternoon, I found an old index sheet listing company financial folders. Several folders mentioned on the list no longer existed. They were gone. Completely gone. The realization made me uneasy. Someone had removed them. Not accidentally, deliberately. The question was why. And more importantly, who? The answer seemed obvious. Daniel, but proving it would be difficult. A few days later, I discovered something even more concerning. I was reviewing older financial statements when I noticed unusual transfers. At first glance, they looked routine. Business expenses, vendor payments, contractor reimbursements. But something didn't add up. The numbers were strange. Repeated amounts, similar timing. Transactions that appeared structured rather than natural. I wasn't a forensic accountant, but I had spent years managing records, and my instincts told me something was wrong. Very wrong. I made copies of everything. Then I sent them to Melissa. 2 days later, she called. Tracy, where did you find these? The seriousness in her voice immediately alarmed me. In the basement. A long pause followed. Then she spoke carefully. I'm not making accusations yet. My stomach tightened. But these transfers deserve a closer look. What are you saying? Melissa exhaled slowly. I'm saying there may be assets that haven't been properly disclosed. I froze. Assets. The word echoed through my mind. Daniel had already submitted financial disclosures. If Melissa was right, then he wasn't just lying about my contributions. He might be hiding money. The possibility left me stunned. For years, I had assumed the divorce was about ego, control, pride. A husband trying to erase his wife's role in his success. Now another possibility emerged. What if Daniel was protecting something? Someone. The idea wouldn't leave my mind. That night I sat alone in the living room reviewing documents again. Every transfer, every statement, every date. Patterns slowly emerged. Certain transactions appeared shortly before the divorce filing. Others stretched back months, maybe longer. I felt a chill run through me. Daniel hadn't decided to leave me suddenly. This wasn't impulsive. It had been planned, carefully, methodically, perhaps for a very long time. The realization hurt more than I expected, because it meant that while I had been trying to save our marriage, he had already been preparing for its end. Around midnight, I finally stopped working. Exhausted, I gathered the files into organized stacks. Before heading upstairs, I looked down at the table. Loan documents, letters, financial records, missing folders, questionable transfers. Each piece revealed another crack in Daniel's story. And for the first time, I began to suspect something much larger than infidelity. Something financial, something deliberate, something dangerous. I didn't know exactly what I was uncovering. Not yet, but I knew one thing. The man who claimed I had contributed nothing to his success was desperately trying to hide something. And sooner or later, I was going to find out what it was. 3 days after Melissa warned me that Daniel might be hiding assets, I received a phone call that changed everything. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, I would have ignored it. Lately, however, my life seemed to revolve around unexpected calls. Lawyers, financial advisors, court clerks. So I answered, "Hello?" For a moment, nobody spoke. Then a woman's voice came through the line. Soft, nervous, almost hesitant. "Mrs. Spencer?" My stomach tightened. "Yes." Another pause. Then she said the last name that instantly made my pulse race. "My name is Claire Bennett." I froze. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Of all the people I expected to hear from, Claire was near the bottom of the list. The woman I had spent months suspecting. The woman whose name had appeared in messages. The woman I believed might be responsible for destroying my marriage. Now she was calling me directly. "I know this is probably the last call you wanted to receive," she said. I remained silent. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to say. Claire continued, "But I think we need to talk." My grip tightened around the phone. "Why?" The hesitation that followed felt genuine. "Because there are things you don't know." I almost laughed. There were many things I didn't know. The question was whether I could trust the person offering answers. What kind of things? I'd rather explain in person. The request immediately triggered my suspicion. "No." Her voice softened. "I understand why you're hesitant. You've worked for my husband for years. I know. And now you suddenly want to help me?" Another silence. Then she said something unexpected. "I should have called sooner." The guilt in her voice sounded real, painfully real. For the first time, I felt uncertain. Maybe she wasn't calling to manipulate me. Maybe she was calling because she had something important to say. Finally, I asked, "Where?" 2 days later, I walked into a small diner on the outskirts of Columbus. The place looked exactly like the type of restaurant nobody would notice. Simple booths, coffee cups, local regulars, the smell of bacon and fresh pie. A safe place for difficult conversations. Claire was already there. She sat alone near the back. The moment I saw her, I felt a surge of emotions. Anger, resentment, Curiosity, fear. For months, I had imagined confronting her, but reality felt different. She looked exhausted. Not glamorous, not triumphant, exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. Her shoulders seemed tense, as though she hadn't slept well in weeks. When I approached the table, she stood immediately. "Mrs. Spencer." I sat down. "Let's skip the formalities." She nodded. A waitress brought coffee. Neither of us touched it. For several moments, we simply stared at each other. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me for months. "Are you sleeping with my husband?" Claire looked genuinely shocked. Then she shook her head. "No." The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without calculation. "No." I studied her face. People can lie, but something about her reaction felt sincere. Still, I wasn't convinced. "Then why were you always texting him?" She sighed. "Because he was my boss." "At midnight." Another sigh. "He expected employees to answer whenever he called." The bitterness in her voice surprised me. That wasn't the response I expected from a woman having an affair. I remained silent. Claire looked down at the table. Then she spoke quietly. "I know what you think of me." "You don't." She met my eyes. "I know you think I'm the reason your marriage ended." I didn't deny it, because until that moment, it had been true. Claire nodded slowly. "That's why I wanted to meet." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her purse. She removed a folder, not large, but thick enough to immediately capture my attention. She placed it on the table between us. "What is that?" "Part of the truth." My pulse quickened. Carefully, she opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, financial statements, calendar entries, copies of company records. I stared at them, confused. "What am I looking at?" Claire took a deep breath. "Daniel used me." The statement caught me off guard. "What? 4 years?" I frowned. "Used you? How?" She laughed bitterly. The sound contained no humor. "He made everyone believe I was closer to him than I really was." I didn't understand. Claire continued. "He liked people assuming things." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying he never corrected the rumors." The room suddenly felt quieter. Claire leaned forward. "He wanted people to think I was important." I stared at her. "Why?" "Because it distracted them." The answer didn't make sense, at least not yet. Claire opened one of the documents. "Look at these." I studied the pages. Email chains, transfer approvals, internal company communications. Several contained Daniel's name. Others included financial references I didn't recognize. "What am I supposed to see?" Claire pointed toward several dates. "These transactions." I immediately recognized some of them. Melissa had shown me similar records. The questionable transfers, the hidden movements of money. My heart began beating faster. "Where did you get these?" "I copied them." The diner suddenly felt very small, very quiet, very dangerous. "Why?" Claire looked away. For several seconds, she seemed to debate whether to answer honestly. Eventually, she did. "Because I was scared." The vulnerability in her voice surprised me. "He kept asking me to process things that didn't feel right." I listened carefully. "He never explained everything." She paused. "But eventually, I realized certain records were being hidden." My mouth went dry. "Hidden from who?" Claire looked directly at me. "You." The single word landed like a stone. I sat back in the booth, trying to absorb everything, trying to understand, trying to decide whether this woman was telling the truth. "Why are you giving this to me now?" The question clearly hurt her, because she already knew the answer sounded terrible. "I should have done it sooner." "That's not an answer." Claire nodded. You're right. For the first time, I saw tears forming in her eyes. I was afraid. The honesty caught me off guard. Afraid of what? Losing my job. She swallowed hard. Being sued. Being blamed. The words came faster now. He has money. He has lawyers. He has influence. I remembered the confidence Daniel carried everywhere. The way people deferred to him. The way employees seemed nervous around him. Maybe fear wasn't irrational. Maybe it was realistic. Claire continued. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business. She laughed bitterly. Then I saw what he did to you. Immediately, I knew what she meant. The anniversary dinner, the restaurant, the humiliation. Claire nodded before I could speak. I heard everything. A painful memory flashed through my mind. Anyone can be replaced. I felt sick all over again. He said those things in public. Claire's voice cracked. He wasn't even ashamed. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she opened another section of the folder. This time, she removed a flash drive. My eyes narrowed. What is that? Her expression turned serious. Insurance. The answer made my stomach tighten. What kind of insurance? Claire hesitated. Then she said the words that changed everything. I have emails. My pulse accelerated. What else? She swallowed. Financial records. The air seemed to disappear from the room. And, for the first time since arriving, Claire looked genuinely frightened. When she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. I also have recordings. The world seemed to stop. Recordings. Actual recordings. Not rumors, not suspicions. Evidence. Real evidence. And suddenly, for the first time since my divorce began, I realized Daniel Spencer might be facing a problem much bigger than an angry wife. Because the woman I thought was his ally was quietly becoming his greatest threat. After Claire told me she had recordings, I sat frozen in that diner booth. The coffee between us had gone cold. Neither of us noticed. Neither of us cared. My mind was racing. For months, I had viewed Claire Bennett as the woman standing on the opposite side of my life. The young secretary. The attractive employee. The person whose name appeared in late-night messages. The woman I blamed for my marriage falling apart. Yet the exhausted person sitting across from me looked nothing like the villain I had imagined. She looked frightened, tired, and strangely alone. I stared at the flash drive resting on the table. What exactly is on those recordings? Claire hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, because she seemed embarrassed by the answer. Finally, she spoke. Things I never expected to hear. I waited. Things I wish I had never heard. The sincerity in her voice made me listen more carefully. For the next hour, Claire told me a story I never anticipated, and with every minute, my understanding of the situation changed. How long have you worked for Daniel? I asked. Almost 6 years? 6 years? Long enough to know the company, long enough to know my husband, long enough to witness his transformation. Claire folded her hands together. When I started, I admired him. The comment surprised me, but it made sense. Many people admired Daniel, successful business owner, respected in the community, confident, charismatic. He knew exactly how to present himself. I thought he was a mentor. Claire gave a sad smile. At first he was. I remained silent. Then the company grew. Her expression hardened slightly, and everything changed. The sentence sounded familiar, because I had experienced the exact same thing. Success hadn't simply changed Daniel. It had magnified something already inside him, something selfish, something cruel. Claire continued. At first, it was small things. I immediately thought of my own story. The criticism, the arrogance, the secrecy. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had noticed. He started treating employees differently. How? He wanted loyalty. That's normal. She shook her head. Not loyalty. A pause. Obedience. The distinction mattered, and we both knew it. Claire explained how Daniel gradually created an environment where employees felt afraid to challenge him. People who disagreed with him found themselves excluded from important projects. Promotions disappeared, schedules changed, careers stalled. Nobody could prove anything, yet everyone noticed. He never yelled, Claire said. Then what did he do? He made people afraid. The answer felt disturbingly accurate. I had experienced something similar in my marriage. Daniel didn't need to scream. His disappointment alone carried weight. His approval became something people chased. His disapproval became something people feared. Claire looked down at the table. For a while, I convinced myself it was normal. Her voice softened. I needed the job. That part I understood immediately. Claire was a single mother. She had mentioned it briefly during our first meeting. Now she explained further. Her son was 8 years old. She had no financial support from his father. Every paycheck mattered. Every insurance benefit mattered. Every promotion mattered. Daniel knew that, and according to Claire, he used it. He'd promise opportunities. Then take them away. She nodded. If someone questioned him. A painful silence settled between us. The pattern was becoming clear. Control. Everything came back to control. Then Claire revealed something that truly shocked me. There were rumors about us almost from the beginning. I stared at her. The affair rumors? Yes. My stomach tightened. What did Daniel do? Claire laughed bitterly. Nothing. The answer confused me. What do you mean? He never stopped them. A chill ran through me. She continued. People would make comments, ask questions, assume things, and Daniel never corrected anyone. Suddenly, I remembered all those uncomfortable moments, the way people looked at Claire, the whispers, the assumptions, the strange smiles. Daniel had allowed it, intentionally. Why, Claire answered before I asked. Because it helped him. How? She leaned forward. Because people focused on me. I frowned. And nobody paid attention to what he was actually doing. The words hung in the air. Slowly, pieces began connecting. Daniel hadn't necessarily created the rumors, but he had benefited from them, encouraged them, used them. Claire became the distraction. The convenient story, the obvious suspect. While everyone watched her, they ignored everything else, including his finances, including his decisions, including whatever he was trying to hide. I felt sick, not only because of what Daniel had done, because I had fallen for it too. I had blamed Claire. I had hated her. And perhaps that was exactly what Daniel wanted. After a few moments, Claire opened her purse again. This time, she removed a small digital recorder. My pulse quickened. Is that one of them? She nodded. The room suddenly felt colder. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she pressed play. Static filled the air. Shuffling papers, office sounds. Then Daniel's voice. I recognized it immediately. Confident, relaxed, arrogant. The recording appeared to be from his office. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Business discussion, scheduling, financial updates. Then another voice asked a question. I couldn't identify the speaker. What about your wife? A short pause followed. Then Daniel laughed. Actually laughed. The sound made my skin crawl. Tracy doesn't understand any of this stuff. The words hurt. But they weren't surprising. Unfortunately, the recording continued. She's still living 20 years in the past. Another laugh, more voices. Then the conversation shifted. What happened next made my stomach turn. One person mentioned the divorce. Daniel responded instantly. "I'll be fine." His confidence sounded absolute. Someone asked why. And then came the sentence. The sentence neither Claire nor I would ever forget. "No judge is going to believe an old housewife over me." The diner disappeared around me. For a moment, all I could hear was Daniel's voice. Cold, dismissive, cruel. No judge is going to believe an old housewife over me. The words hit harder than I expected, because they revealed exactly what he thought of me. Not his wife, not his partner, not the woman who helped build his company, just an old housewife. Someone irrelevant, someone disposable, someone powerless. Claire stopped the recording. Silence filled the booth. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The humiliation felt fresh all over again, as though I were hearing it for the first time. Eventually, Claire broke the silence. "I'm sorry." I looked up. Her eyes were filled with genuine regret. I should have done something sooner. For the first time, I believed her. Completely. Not because of the recording, because of the pain in her face. She wasn't protecting herself anymore. She was carrying guilt. Real guilt. And guilt only exists when someone wishes they had acted differently. "You were scared." The words surprised both of us. Claire blinked, then nodded. "Yes." I understood fear. I understood silence. I understood staying too long in situations that slowly destroy you. Perhaps our circumstances had been different, but the emotions weren't. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Claire reached into her purse one final time. This time, she removed a sealed envelope. My heart immediately accelerated. "What is that?" Her expression changed. The sadness disappeared. The fear returned. And for the first time that afternoon, she looked genuinely nervous. Something much bigger. A chill moved through me. "What do you mean?" Claire swallowed hard. Then she placed the envelope on the table between us. "I haven't shown this to anyone." I stared at it. "What is inside?" Her answer came quietly. But it changed everything. "It's the reason Daniel would destroy me if he knew I still had it." For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope. The diner suddenly felt quieter than before. Even the clinking dishes and conversations around us seemed distant. Claire's words echoed inside my head. "It's the reason Daniel would destroy me if he knew I still had it." A cold sensation crept through my chest. I looked at her. She wasn't exaggerating. She wasn't being dramatic. She was terrified. Real fear lived in her eyes. "What is it?" I asked quietly. Claire glanced around the diner before answering. "A backup." The answer confused me. "A backup of what?" She pushed the envelope closer. "Everything." My pulse accelerated. Slowly, I opened it. Inside were several printed documents, a flash drive, and a handwritten list of dates. The moment I saw the first page, my stomach tightened. Bank account numbers, transfer records, corporate payment logs, wire confirmations, pages and pages of financial activity. I immediately recognized several of the transactions. They matched the questionable records Melissa had flagged, but this was much more detailed, far more detailed. "How did you get these?" Claire lowered her voice. "Because I processed some of them." I looked up sharply. "What?" "Not knowingly." She swallowed hard. "At least not at first." The explanation that followed was both complicated and horrifying. For years, Daniel had divided responsibilities among employees. No single person handled every financial process. One person prepared documents, another approved them, someone else finalized them. The structure appeared normal, professional, efficient. But according to Claire, it also made it easier to hide certain activities. Because no employee ever saw the complete picture, until she accidentally did. About 18 months earlier, a software issue caused several files to be routed incorrectly. When Claire reviewed them, she noticed something strange. The names attached to certain transactions didn't match existing vendors. At first, she assumed it was a clerical mistake. Then she noticed a pattern. Repeated payments, similar amounts, consistent timing, money moving into accounts that seemed unrelated to company operations. The more she investigated the stranger, everything became. Eventually, curiosity turned into concern. Concern turned into suspicion, and suspicion turned into fear. I started saving copies. The confession came quietly. I stared at her. Why? She gave a sad smile. Because my instincts told me something was wrong. That sounded familiar. My instincts had warned me too. The difference was that I hadn't listened soon enough. Claire continued. At first, I thought maybe it was tax-related. Then, she shook her head. It got worse. Much worse. According to Claire, Daniel became increasingly secretive over the past year. Certain meetings were never documented. Certain expenses disappeared from normal reports. Certain financial decisions bypassed standard procedures entirely. And anyone who asked questions received vague answers, or warnings, or both. I felt my chest tightening. This wasn't simply a divorce anymore. This was something else entirely. Something bigger. Something dangerous. I carefully returned the documents to the envelope. What do we do now? Claire looked relieved that I didn't dismiss her. Show your attorney. That part was obvious. What about you? A shadow crossed her face. For the first time, she looked uncertain. I don't know. The answer broke my heart a little. Because despite everything, Claire was still a young woman trying to protect her child. Trying to protect her future. Trying to survive. Daniel had power, money, connections. She had a son and a paycheck. The imbalance was obvious. When we finally left the diner, neither of us noticed that nearly 3 hours had passed. Outside, the sky had darkened. Clouds covered the afternoon sun. The parking lot felt strangely empty. Before we separated, Claire stopped me. Tracy. It was the first time she had used my first name. I turned. If something happens, my stomach immediately dropped. What do you mean? She hesitated, then forced a smile. Nothing dramatic. But we both knew she didn't believe that. If something happens, make sure Melissa gets everything. I stared at her. The fear in her eyes had returned, stronger this time. And suddenly, for the first time, I realized how much risk she was taking. Not for herself, for me. That realization stayed with me all evening. The next morning, I met with Melissa Grant. The moment she saw the documents, her expression changed. By the time she finished reviewing them, she looked both impressed and concerned. Where did these come from? Claire. Melissa leaned back in her chair. Your husband's secretary? Yes. Several seconds passed. Then Melissa slowly removed her glasses. This could be significant. My heart raced. How significant? She carefully organized several pages into separate stacks. Potentially very significant. The answer wasn't specific, but it was enough. Melissa immediately requested forensic review of the financial records. Within days, additional questions emerged. Questions Daniel probably didn't want anyone asking. Questions about disclosures. Questions about transfers. Questions about assets. Meanwhile, Daniel seemed increasingly confident, almost smug. Every communication from his legal team carried the same tone. Aggressive, dismissive, certain of victory. One afternoon, Melissa forwarded me a settlement proposal. I read it twice, then laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insulting. Daniel still expected me to accept a fraction of what I was entitled to. Apparently, he believed I would eventually give up. Perhaps he assumed financial pressure would break me, or emotional exhaustion, or fear. Maybe all three. What he didn't know was that I finally possessed something stronger than fear: the truth. Several days later, another problem appeared. Claire called. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. Her breathing sounded uneven. Claire? I think he knows. My entire body went rigid. What happened? He questioned me. The words came quickly. Nervous questions. About files, about records, about backups. My stomach tightened. Did you tell him anything? No. Are you sure? Absolutely. I believed her. Yet the situation still terrified me. Daniel was many things: arrogant, selfish, cruel. But he wasn't stupid. If he sensed danger, he would react. The only question was how. Over the next week, Claire reported several unsettling incidents. Her access permissions changed unexpectedly. Meetings were canceled. Responsibilities shifted. Employees began acting strangely around her. Nobody openly accused her of anything. But the message was clear. Someone was isolating her. Someone was testing her. Someone was watching. The stress affected both of us. Every phone call made me nervous. Every email made me anxious. The court date was approaching quickly, and despite our growing collection of evidence, nothing felt certain. Then, 2 days before the preliminary hearing, Claire disappeared. At first, I assumed she was busy, maybe overwhelmed, maybe exhausted. But when she failed to answer text, concern turned into panic. Then, panic turned into fear. I called repeatedly. No response. Melissa called. Nothing. An entire day passed. Then another. Still nothing. I barely slept. My imagination created endless possibilities. Had Daniel discovered everything? Had Claire changed her mind? Had she decided the risk was too great? Had she accepted a payoff? Or worse, the uncertainty was unbearable. By the evening before the hearing, I felt physically sick. Without Claire, our case became much weaker. Not impossible, but weaker. The recordings, the testimony, the explanations. So much depended on her. Around 9 o'clock that night, I returned home after meeting with Melissa. The house felt empty, silent, lonely. As I approached the front door, something caught my attention. A large envelope sat inside the mailbox. No stamp, no return address, nothing. My pulse quickened immediately. I opened it. Inside was a flash drive. Only a flash drive. No note, no explanation, no name. Just a small silver USB device resting in the center of the envelope. And somehow, before I even touched it, I already knew exactly who had sent it. I barely slept the night before the hearing. The mysterious flash drive sat on my kitchen table like a ticking clock. For nearly an hour after finding it, I simply stared at it. Part of me wanted to plug it in immediately. Another part was terrified of what I might find, or who might have sent it. Eventually, I called Melissa. She arrived less than 30 minutes later. The moment she saw the envelope, she became serious. You haven't opened it. I shook my head. No. Good. She carefully picked it up. Let's do this the right way. We spent the next hour reviewing the contents together. What we found left both of us speechless. The drive contained duplicate copies of everything Claire had already provided: emails, financial records, internal reports, transfer logs. But there was more, much more. Someone had organized everything into folders. Detailed folders, chronological folders, cross-referenced folders. The level of preparation was astonishing. Whoever assembled the files knew exactly what investigators would need, and at the center of everything sat one undeniable fact. Daniel Spencer had not disclosed everything, not even close. Several previously unknown accounts appeared throughout the records: additional transfers, additional payments, additional financial activity. The evidence wasn't complete enough to prove everything, but it raised enormous questions. Questions Daniel would eventually have to answer. Melissa leaned back in her chair. "I think Claire sent this." I agreed. "No note, no explanation, just insurance. Just in case something happened to her." That realization unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. The next morning arrived far too quickly. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I woke before sunrise. My stomach was in knots. No amount of preparation could change the reality of what awaited me. After 30 years of marriage, I was about to face Daniel in court, the man I once trusted with my entire life, the man who now seemed determined to erase me from it. The courthouse stood in downtown Columbus, large, cold, impersonal. As Melissa and I entered the building, I felt my pulse accelerating. People moved through security checkpoints. Lawyers carried briefcases. Court staff hurried through hallways. Everyone seemed calm except me. Melissa noticed immediately. "You okay?" I forced a smile. "No," she nodded. "That's normal." Unfortunately, her reassurance didn't help much. A few minutes later, I saw Daniel. He stood near the courtroom entrance, speaking with Stephen Walsh. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect confidence. At first glance, he looked exactly like the successful businessman everyone admired. The image was carefully constructed, deliberately polished. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Daniel offered a small smile. The gesture wasn't friendly. It wasn't warm. It felt like a man acknowledging a competition he expected to win. Then he looked away, as though I no longer mattered. The familiar pain returned. But something else accompanied it now. Anger. Not explosive anger. Controlled anger. The kind that quietly fuels determination. Inside the courtroom, everyone took their seats. The hearing began shortly afterward. Judge Robert Hale entered. The room rose. Formalities followed. Then the legal argument started. Almost immediately, I understood Daniel's strategy, or rather, Stephen Walsh's strategy, because the attorney delivered it with polished precision. According to Daniel's legal team, the marriage had effectively ended long ago. According to Daniel's legal team, the company represented the result of Daniel's individual expertise and effort. According to Daniel's legal team, I had primarily served as a homemaker. The familiar narrative. The same lie wrapped in different language. I listened quietly. Every sentence felt like another attempt to erase my life. Years of bookkeeping became occasional assistance. Financial guarantees became limited support. Sacrifice became informal involvement. The more Stephen spoke, the more furious I became. Not because he was persuasive, because he was rewriting history and doing it confidently. When Melissa stood to respond, the atmosphere shifted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't become emotional. Instead, she began presenting facts: loan documents, business records, signed guarantees, letters, evidence, real evidence. Several times I noticed Daniel's expression tighten. Only briefly, but enough to suggest discomfort, enough to suggest concern. For the first time all morning, he didn't look completely confident. Still, he remained composed. Too composed. The real shock came later, as financial disclosures were discussed. Melissa carefully introduced questions regarding certain transfers, certain accounts, certain inconsistencies. Nothing dramatic. Not yet, just enough to establish concern. Stephen Walsh immediately objected. Predictably, the argument became technical, procedural, complex. Yet beneath all the legal language, one issue remained obvious. Money had moved. The question was where and why. Eventually, Judge Hale turned toward Daniel. Several direct questions followed. At first, Daniel answered smoothly, comfortably, like a man accustomed to being believed. Then one particular question changed everything. Have all relevant financial accounts been disclosed? The courtroom seemed unusually quiet. Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes. The answer came immediately, without reflection, without uncertainty, without caution. Just yes. A simple word, one word. Yet something about it bothered me. Perhaps because I knew what sat inside the flash drive. Perhaps because I knew what Claire had shown us. Or perhaps because I had spent 30 years learning how Daniel behaved when he lied. Whatever the reason, I recognized it. Melissa recognized it too. I could tell by the look on her face. Still, she remained calm, professional, patient. The hearing continued. But a new tension had entered the room, one that hadn't existed before. For the first time, Daniel wasn't merely defending himself. He was protecting something, and everyone seemed to feel it. Unfortunately, another problem quickly emerged. A very serious problem. Claire was missing, still missing. Melissa checked her phone repeatedly. No messages, no calls, no explanations. Nothing. The empty witness chair felt impossible to ignore. Every time I looked at it, anxiety tightened inside my chest. Claire wasn't scheduled to testify yet, but eventually she would need to appear, and every hour that passed made her absence harder to explain. The hearing paused briefly for lunch. During the break, Melissa and I sat in a quiet conference room. Neither of us touched the sandwiches someone had provided. "What if she doesn't come?" I asked. Melissa didn't answer immediately. That alone scared me. Finally, she spoke. "We continue." But her expression softened. It would be harder. Harder. Not impossible. But harder. I hated the word. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. More arguments, more documents, more legal maneuvering. By the time court adjourned for the day, I felt emotionally exhausted. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited near the entrance. Nothing major, just local media covering business litigation. Still, Daniel seemed annoyed by their presence. He quickly disappeared with his attorney. I watched him leave. For years, I had viewed him as unstoppable, untouchable. Now, for the first time, I saw cracks. Small cracks, but cracks nonetheless. That evening, Melissa and I reviewed strategy once more. The next stage would be critical, especially if Claire remained unavailable. As we finished discussing plans, my phone vibrated. The sound immediately caught my attention. Unknown number. My heart jumped. For several seconds, I stared at the screen. Then I answered. "Hello." Static. Silence. Then a familiar voice. Weak, breathless, terrified. "Tracy!" I sat upright immediately. "Claire." What she said next sent ice through my veins. "I think Daniel knows everything." The moment I heard Claire's voice, every muscle in my body tightened. "Claire." Her breathing sounded uneven, as though she had been crying, or running, or both. For several terrifying seconds, all I could hear was static. Then she spoke again. I didn't know who else to call. I immediately stood from my chair. Melissa looked up from across the conference table. One glance at my face told her something was wrong. "Where are you?" I asked. Claire hesitated. "I don't want to say over the phone." Fear rushed through me, not because of what she said, because of how she said it. This wasn't the voice of someone seeking attention. This was the voice of someone genuinely frightened. "Are you safe?" Another pause. "I think so." Think, not know. Think. I closed my eyes briefly. Claire listened to me carefully. Her breathing remained shaky. "You need to come to court tomorrow." Silence, then a quiet answer. "I know. Can you do that?" Several long seconds passed. Finally, she spoke. Yes. The single word carried more courage than confidence. But it was enough. Before ending the call, she said something else, something I didn't fully understand at the time. There's one thing you still don't know. My pulse quickened. What? Another pause. Then, I'm not the woman Daniel was hiding. The line went dead. I stared at my phone. Melissa immediately stood. What happened? I repeated everything. Every word, every detail. By the time I finished, the room had fallen silent. Melissa looked thoughtful, concerned, focused. What did she mean? I shook my head. I don't know. But deep down, I suspected. And if my suspicion was correct, then our case was about to become much bigger than anyone expected. The following morning, I arrived at court feeling emotionally exhausted. The previous night had offered almost no sleep. Questions kept circling through my mind. Where had Claire been? Why was she hiding? Who was Daniel actually protecting? And most importantly, would she really show up? The courtroom gradually filled. Attorneys, clerks, observers, court staff. Everyone settled into place. Everyone except Claire. Her chair remained empty. Again. I felt my stomach tighten. Melissa remained calm, at least outwardly, but I knew her well enough by now to recognize tension. She checked her watch repeatedly. The proceedings began. Stephen Walsh appeared unusually confident, more confident than the previous day. The change didn't escape my notice. Neither did Daniel's attitude. He looked relaxed, comfortable, almost victorious, as though something had shifted in his favor overnight. The possibility terrified me. Maybe Claire had changed her mind. Maybe Daniel had convinced her to stay silent. Maybe she wasn't coming at all. The hearing moved forward. Financial evidence was discussed. Documentation was reviewed. Arguments were presented. And still, Claire did not appear. Hour after hour passed. My anxiety became almost unbearable. Then shortly after noon, Melissa stood. Your Honor, we would like to call Claire Bennett. The room immediately grew quieter. Every eye shifted toward the courtroom entrance. Nothing happened. No movement. No opening door. Nothing. My heart sank. Melissa remained standing, waiting. Still nothing. The silence felt endless. Then suddenly, the courtroom doors opened. A woman stepped inside. For one brief moment, I barely recognized her. Claire looked exhausted, pale, tired. But she was there, and judging by Daniel's reaction, her appearance was the last thing he expected. The color disappeared from his face instantly. I had seen Daniel angry. I had seen him arrogant. I had seen him dismissive. I had never seen him afraid. Until that moment. Claire slowly walked toward the witness stand. The entire courtroom watched. Even Judge Hale seemed aware that something important was about to happen. After taking her oath, Claire sat down. Her hands trembled slightly, yet her voice remained steady. Melissa began with simple questions. Employment history, job responsibilities, length of service, basic facts. Claire answered calmly, professionally, credibly. Then the real questioning began. Did you have regular access to company records? Yes. Were you involved in administrative financial processes? Yes. Did you observe transactions that concerned you? Claire looked directly at the judge. Yes. The room became noticeably quieter. Melissa carefully introduced the documents Claire had provided. Emails, transfer records, internal communications. One by one, methodically, patiently, each piece strengthened our case. Then Stephen Walsh rose for cross-examination. The attack came immediately, predictably. Miss Bennett, are you a disgruntled employee? No. Were you recently disciplined? No. Do you dislike Daniel Spencer? Claire didn't hesitate. No. The answer seemed to surprise him. Walsh adjusted his strategy. Then why are you testifying against him? For the first time, Claire looked directly at Daniel. Several seconds passed. Then she answered, because the truth matters. The courtroom fell silent. Even Walsh seemed momentarily caught off guard. He quickly recovered. You expect this court to believe your version of events? Claire remained calm. I expect the court to review the evidence. Perfect answer. Melissa's expression didn't change, but I could see satisfaction in her eyes. Then came the moment that changed everything. Melissa approached the witness stand once more. Claire, did Mr. Spencer ever discuss his wife in your presence? The question immediately captured everyone's attention. Claire nodded. Many times. Daniel shifted in his seat. The movement didn't go unnoticed. Melissa continued. Did you ever record those conversations? Yes. Stephen Walsh immediately objected. The judge reviewed the matter. After several tense minutes, permission was granted to proceed. My heart pounded. Claire handed over the recordings. One was selected. The same recording I had already heard. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then Daniel's voice filled the room. Clear, confident, unmistakable. No judge is going to believe an old housewife over me. The words echoed throughout the courtroom. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence afterward felt enormous. Daniel stared straight ahead. His jaw tightened. His confidence visibly weakened. And yet, that wasn't even the most damaging evidence. Because Claire wasn't finished, Melissa approached again. Claire, throughout these proceedings, many people have assumed you were personally involved with Mr. Spencer. I froze. The entire room seemed to freeze with me. This was it. The question everyone secretly wanted answered. Claire took a slow breath. Then she answered clearly. No. The word landed like a hammer. No. Melissa nodded. Were you ever romantically involved with Daniel Spencer? No. The answer came without hesitation, without uncertainty, without fear. No. A murmur spread through the courtroom. People exchanged glances, whispered, reacted. Years of assumptions suddenly collapsed. Everything I had believed, everything everyone had believed, wrong, completely wrong. Then Melissa asked the final question. If not you, was there another woman? The room became perfectly silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. Claire looked toward Daniel. For the first time, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. Not fear for herself, fear of what would happen next. Then she spoke, quietly, clearly, and directly into the official court record. Yes. My breath caught. The entire courtroom seemed to lean forward. Melissa's next words arrived slowly, carefully. What was her name? Daniel suddenly stood. Objection. The force of his reaction startled everyone. Too late, much too late, because Claire had already decided, after months of silence, months of fear, months of carrying the truth alone, she was finally ready to say it. And the name she was about to reveal would destroy far more than Daniel's defense. It would destroy his entire carefully constructed lie. The courtroom seemed frozen in time. Daniel was still standing. His face had lost all color. For the first time since the divorce began, he no longer looked like a powerful businessman controlling the situation. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. Objection, he repeated. His voice sounded sharper this time, more desperate. Judge Hale looked directly at him. Mr. Spencer, sit down. Daniel remained standing for another moment, then slowly he lowered himself into his chair. The damage had already been done. Everyone in the room knew it. Claire sat quietly in the witness box. Melissa stood beside her. Neither woman appeared intimidated anymore, and somehow, seeing them together filled me with strength. For months, Daniel had controlled the narrative. For months, he had controlled the story. Now he was losing that control. Melissa spoke calmly. "Miss Bennett, please answer the question." The silence that followed felt endless. Then Claire finally spoke. "Her name is Vanessa Carter." The reaction was immediate. Whispers erupted throughout the courtroom. People exchanged confused looks. The name meant nothing to most of them, but not to everyone. Because the moment I heard it, I noticed someone else react. Lauren, my daughter-in-law. Until that moment, she had remained relatively calm throughout the proceedings. Now, her entire body stiffened, her eyes widened, and suddenly she looked terrified. I noticed. Melissa noticed. Even Judge Hale appeared to notice. Claire continued. Vanessa Carter received financial support from accounts connected to company funds. Stephen Walsh immediately objected again, but the momentum had shifted. The judge allowed the testimony to continue. Melissa approached the evidence table. Several documents appeared on the courtroom screens. Transfer records, account summaries, payment histories. One by one, the information painted a troubling picture. Luxury apartment payments, vehicle expenses, credit card charges, large deposits. Everything connected back to Vanessa Carter. The amounts were substantial, far too substantial to dismiss as coincidence. Far too substantial to explain away easily. I turned toward Daniel. He stared at the screens without expression, but his hands were clenched tightly. The confidence that had defined him throughout the divorce was disappearing, slowly, painfully, publicly. Then Melissa asked another question. Miss Bennett, how did you first become aware of Vanessa Carter? Claire swallowed, then answered. Through Daniel. The courtroom became quiet again. He discussed her frequently. How? Claire hesitated, not because she was uncertain, because she seemed embarrassed. He was proud of her. The answer hit me harder than I expected. Proud. The word felt strangely personal, more personal than affair, more personal than betrayal, because it suggested emotional investment, a relationship, a future, something beyond casual dishonesty. Claire continued. He talked about her as if she understood him. The statement made my stomach twist. For years, I had stood beside Daniel, supported him, protected him, believed in him. And apparently somewhere along the way, he decided another woman understood him better. The pain was sharp, but strangely different now. Not devastating, not crushing, because something inside me had already begun changing. The truth no longer surprised me. It only confirmed what I already knew. Daniel wasn't the man I thought he was. The bigger shock arrived moments later. Melissa displayed another document, a series of text messages, carefully authenticated, carefully preserved. Messages connecting Vanessa Carter to someone else. Someone sitting inside the courtroom. Lauren. My breath caught immediately. The room erupted into whispers again. Lauren's face turned pale. Beside her, Ethan looked confused, then concerned, then horrified. I stared at the screen, again and again, hoping I was somehow misunderstanding. I wasn't. Vanessa and Lauren knew each other, not casually, not professionally. Personally, very personally. Friends? Close friends. The realization hit like a physical blow. Melissa's voice remained calm. Mrs. Spencer. She was addressing Lauren. Are you acquainted with Vanessa Carter? Stephen Walsh objected immediately, but the damage was already spreading. Everyone had seen the messages. Everyone had seen the names. Everyone had seen the dates. Lauren looked trapped. For several painful seconds, she couldn't speak. Finally, she nodded. Yes. The answer barely escaped her lips. The courtroom became even quieter. Melissa continued. How long have you known her? Lauren looked toward Ethan, then toward Daniel, then down at her hands. A few years. A few years. Long enough. Far too long. I felt my chest tightening. Questions raced through my mind. How much did Lauren know? When did she know it? Why hadn't she said anything? Then came the question nobody wanted answered. Melissa asked it anyway. Did Ethan Spencer know about Vanessa Carter? The room seemed to stop breathing. Every eye shifted toward my son. My son. The little boy whose homework I had helped with. The teenager whose football games I never missed. The man I had spent my life loving. Ethan looked stunned, cornered, broken. For several moments, he said nothing. Then he lowered his head. And that was answer enough. The realization hurt more than anything Daniel had done. More than the affair. More than the lies. More than the divorce. Because Daniel had betrayed me as a husband. Ethan had betrayed me as a son. There is a difference. A terrible difference. I stared at him. He couldn't meet my eyes. Not once. Not even for a second. Judge Hale called for order as whispers spread throughout the courtroom. The atmosphere had completely changed. This was no longer a simple divorce dispute. This was a story of deception, financial misconduct, family betrayal, and hidden relationships. The evidence continued. Transaction after transaction, payment after payment. Melissa carefully demonstrated how money flowed through various accounts before ultimately benefiting Vanessa Carter. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Daniel's explanations grew weaker. Stephen Walsh's objections became more frequent, more desperate, less effective. Then Claire delivered another devastating piece of testimony, one that explained everything. For years, people inside the company had assumed Claire was the woman in Daniel's life. Daniel never corrected them, because as long as employees focused on Claire, nobody paid attention to Vanessa. The entire affair had been hidden behind a convenient illusion, a distraction, a false narrative, a shield. And it worked. It worked on employees. It worked on business associates. And worst of all, it worked on me. I thought back to every moment I had blamed Claire. Every moment I had hated her. Every sleepless night. Every painful assumption. All because Daniel wanted people looking in the wrong direction. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Toward the end of the day, court recessed. People slowly filed out. Conversations buzzed throughout the hallways. The story was spreading. Fast. I remained seated, emotionally exhausted. Beside me, Melissa organized documents quietly. Eventually, she placed a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because I honestly didn't know how to answer. Was I okay? My husband had betrayed me. My son had hidden the truth. My daughter-in-law knew more than she admitted. The entire foundation of my family seemed cracked. Yet, strangely, I felt stronger than before. Not because the pain was gone, because uncertainty was disappearing. The lies were finally coming into the light, and once the truth appears, people can no longer hide behind shadows. Across the room, Ethan stood alone. He looked devastated, guilty, ashamed. Several times he started walking toward me. Several times he stopped. Then finally he turned away. I watched him leave, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something important. Daniel wasn't the only person afraid of what would happen next. Everyone who had chosen silence was afraid now, because the truth had started speaking, and it wasn't finished yet. The next morning, I stood outside the courthouse alone. The air felt cold against my skin, not because of the weather, because I knew what was coming. For months, people had spoken about me. Lawyers, witnesses, accountants, employees, even my husband. Everyone seemed eager to explain who Tracy Spencer was, what I contributed, what I didn't contribute, what I deserved, what I didn't deserve. Today, for the first time, I would finally speak for myself. I wasn't sure whether I was nervous or angry, perhaps both. Melissa arrived shortly after I did. She carried several folders beneath her arm, the familiar folders that now contained pieces of my life: loan documents, business records, financial statements, letters, evidence, proof, years of invisible work finally reduced to paper. "You ready?" she asked. I smiled weakly. "No." She nodded. "Good." I laughed softly. "What does that mean?" "It means you're taking this seriously." The answer made sense, because this wasn't just testimony. This was my story. And for 30 years, I had rarely placed myself at the center of it. Inside the courtroom, everyone seemed quieter than usual. The previous day's revelations had changed the atmosphere. The confidence Daniel once carried so effortlessly had vanished. Even Stephen Walsh appeared more cautious, more defensive, more aware of the growing problems surrounding his client. When proceedings began, Melissa stood. "Your Honor, we would like to call Tracy Spencer." My heart immediately accelerated. I slowly walked toward the witness stand. Every step felt heavier than the last. After taking the oath, I sat down. The room seemed larger from that chair. The silence felt louder. Judge Hale looked at me kindly, a small gesture, but one I appreciated. Melissa approached. Her voice remained calm, professional, supportive. "Mrs. Spencer, how long were you married to Daniel Spencer?" 30 years. The answer sounded strange aloud. 30 years. An entire lifetime. Melissa nodded. "Could you describe the early years of the marriage?" And just like that, I began. I spoke about the small apartment, the long work hours, the financial struggles, the dreams, the sacrifices. I spoke about meeting Daniel when neither of us had money, when success was nothing more than a distant hope. I described the early days of the company. The nights spent balancing books at the kitchen table, the weekends consumed by paperwork, the endless phone calls, the invoices, the payroll records, the client correspondence, everything. Melissa allowed me to tell the story naturally, not as a legal argument, as a life, a real life. For the first time in months, I felt people listening, actually listening, not judging, not dismissing, listening. Then Melissa held up a document, the original loan agreement. "Do you recognize this?" "Yes." "What is it?" "The loan that allowed the company to start." Melissa nodded. "Whose signature appears on the guarantee?" I swallowed. "Mine." The document appeared on courtroom screens, large enough for everyone to see, large enough for everyone to understand. My name, my signature, my responsibility. The room remained silent, because facts speak differently than opinions. "And facts are difficult to ignore," Melissa continued. "What would have happened if the business failed? I would have been financially responsible." The significance of the answer seemed obvious. For years, Daniel had claimed the company belonged entirely to him. Yet the risk had belonged to both of us. The contradiction was impossible to miss. Next came the financial records, then the business correspondence, then years of documentation showing my involvement, one by one, patiently, methodically. The picture became clearer, not because Melissa exaggerated, because she didn't. She simply showed the truth. Then she asked a question I hadn't expected. "Did you ever sacrifice professional opportunities for your family or the company?" The answer came immediately. Yes. I thought of promotions, career advancements, training opportunities, job offers, choices I never regretted at the time. Because I believed we were building something together. I turned down several opportunities. Why? Because Daniel needed help. The words sounded almost surreal now. How many times had I placed his dreams ahead of my own? How many times had I convinced myself that partnership meant sacrifice? The answer was probably too many. Melissa nodded. Then she stepped back. The next phase of testimony felt different, more personal, more painful. What changed? The question hung in the air. For several seconds I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know, because the truth hurt. Eventually I spoke. Success changed him. The room remained silent. He became embarrassed by me. I glanced toward Daniel. For the first time, he looked away. He stopped treating me like a partner. He stopped treating me like an equal. He stopped treating me like a wife. The words felt heavy, but freeing, because they were true. Melissa carefully guided me through the anniversary dinner, the humiliation, the comments, the restaurant, the moment Daniel called me replaceable. Several people in the courtroom visibly reacted. Even after hearing the recordings, the story carried emotional weight. Because cruelty sounds different when described by the person who lived through it. Then came cross-examination. Stephen Walsh stood slowly. His expression remained professional, but his confidence was noticeably weaker than before. He approached carefully, almost cautiously. For a while, the questions focused on technical details. Dates, documents, processes, nothing unexpected. Then he changed direction. Mrs. Spencer, isn't it true that your husband was the primary operator of the business? I nodded. Yes. The answer surprised him, because it was honest. He managed daily operations. Yes. He secured clients. Yes. The attorney seemed encouraged. Then he asked the question he thought would help his case. So, the company's success was primarily his achievement. I looked directly at him. Then I answered. No? The room became quiet again. Why not? The answer came from somewhere deep inside me. From 30 years of experience. 30 years of sacrifice. 30 years of truth. Because nobody builds a life alone. The words seemed to hang in the courtroom. I continued. Daniel secured clients. Daniel managed projects. Daniel grew the company. All true, every word. But I carried risk. I managed records. I supported operations. I sacrificed opportunities. I kept our family stable while he chased his goals. The room remained completely silent. Then I said the thing I had needed to say for months. Daniel wants credit for everything that succeeded. My voice trembled slightly. But partnership doesn't work that way. I looked directly at him. For the first time, without fear, without hesitation, without sadness. Neither does marriage. No one moved, no one spoke, not even Stephen Walsh. Because sometimes truth doesn't require embellishment. Sometimes truth stands perfectly well on its own. Melissa called one final piece of evidence, the old letter, the one I found in the basement, the one Daniel wrote decades earlier. She handed it to the court, then asked permission to read it aloud. As the words filled the room, I watched Daniel's face. I watched him hear his younger self, the version of himself that once appreciated me, the version that once understood partnership. If this company survives, it will be because of you as much as me. I love you, Daniel. The silence afterward felt enormous. No objections followed, no explanations, no excuses, because there weren't any. The letter said everything, and for the first time since the divorce began, I felt something unexpected. Peace, not victory, not yet, but peace. Because regardless of the outcome, the truth had finally been heard, and nobody could erase it anymore. The courtroom was unusually quiet on the morning of the ruling. Nobody laughed, nobody chatted, nobody seemed interested in small talk. After weeks of testimony, evidence, revelations, and emotional wounds, everyone understood that this would be the day everything changed. I sat beside Melissa Grant near the front of the courtroom. My hands rested quietly in my lap. Surprisingly, I wasn't nervous anymore. Exhausted, absolutely. Emotionally drained, without question. But nervous, no. Somewhere along the way, something had shifted inside me. When this process began, I was terrified of losing everything. My marriage, my home, my security, my family. Now I understood that most of those things had already been lost long before the divorce papers arrived. The only thing left to recover was myself. Across the room sat Daniel. For the first time in 30 years, I looked at him without searching for the man I once loved. That man was gone. Maybe he had been gone for years. Maybe I simply hadn't wanted to see it. Either way, I wasn't looking for him anymore. Daniel appeared older now, not physically, emotionally. The confidence that once filled every room had faded. The arrogance remained. But the certainty was gone, and that made all the difference. A few seats away sat Ethan. He looked exhausted too. Lauren remained beside him. Neither spoke much anymore. The previous week's testimony had damaged more than Daniel's reputation. It had damaged relationships, trust, family. Some wounds heal slowly. Some take years. Some never heal completely. The courtroom doors opened. Judge Robert Hale entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The ruling began. His voice remained calm, professional, measured. He carefully summarized the evidence presented throughout the proceedings. The marriage, the business, the financial contributions, the documented sacrifices, the loan guarantees, the undisclosed transfers, the hidden financial activity. Every major issue was addressed, methodically, thoroughly, fairly. For several minutes, nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Nobody objected. The truth had already been established. Now came the consequences. Judge Hale first addressed the company. The ruling was clear. The business had not been built solely by Daniel Spencer. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrated substantial contributions from Tracy Spencer throughout the company's development. My eyes filled with tears immediately, not because of money, not because of ownership, because someone had finally acknowledged reality. Someone had finally said publicly what Daniel spent months denying. I mattered. My work mattered. My sacrifices mattered. The judge continued. Asset division would reflect those contributions. The marital estate would be divided accordingly. Several specific financial awards followed. The house, investment accounts, retirement assets, ownership interests. The details blurred together. I barely heard them, because at that moment, something far more important had already happened. My life had been recognized. Officially, legally, publicly. Across the room, Daniel sat motionless. His expression remained difficult to read, yet the tension in his jaw revealed everything. He knew. The outcome wasn't what he expected. Then Judge Hale addressed another issue. The hidden financial activity. The room immediately became still again. The judge carefully explained that evidence presented during proceedings raised serious concerns regarding disclosure obligations. Several accounts appeared improperly reported. Several transfers appeared questionable. Additional review would be necessary. The exact legal consequences would be determined elsewhere. But the message was obvious. Daniel's problems were no longer limited to divorce court. For the first time, I saw genuine fear cross his face. Not embarrassment, not frustration. Fear. Real fear. The type that appears when consequences finally become unavoidable. When the ruling concluded, Judge Hale offered one final observation. One I would never forget. Marriage is not measured only by income. The courtroom remained silent. It is also measured by contribution, sacrifice, partnership, and trust. His gaze briefly shifted toward Daniel, then toward me. The evidence demonstrates that both parties contributed substantially to the life they built together. The words settled over the room like a final verdict on something larger than money, something larger than divorce. Then it was over, just like that. Months of conflict ended with a few spoken sentences. The courtroom slowly began emptying. Attorneys gathered documents. Observers stood. Conversations resumed. Life moved forward. I remained seated. For several moments, I simply breathed. Melissa squeezed my shoulder. "You did it." I smiled softly. "No." She looked confused. "We did it." A few feet away, Claire sat quietly, still exhausted, still carrying visible stress, yet smiling for the first time since I had met her. Without her courage, none of this would have happened. Without her testimony, the truth might never have surfaced. I stood and walked toward her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I hugged her. A real hug. The kind shared between people who survived something together. "Thank you." Claire's eyes immediately filled with tears. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes," I said softly. "I do." Because sometimes courage deserves acknowledgement. And Claire had been courageous. As we separated, I noticed movement behind me. Daniel. My body immediately tensed. For a brief moment, old habits returned. Years of emotional conditioning, years of putting his feelings first. Then I remembered. I didn't have to do that anymore. Daniel stopped several feet away. For the first time in months, we stood alone. No lawyers, no witnesses, no judge. Just us. The way it should have been from the beginning. He looked older than ever, smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. The illusion surrounding him had finally broken. "Tracy." His voice sounded unfamiliar, almost vulnerable. I waited. For several seconds he struggled to find words. Eventually he did. "You didn't have to do this." The statement stunned me, not because it was surprising, because it perfectly captured who Daniel had become. Even now, even after everything, he still believed he was the victim. I looked at him quietly. "Do what?" His eyes shifted away. "Destroy everything." For a moment, I simply stared at him. Then something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling angry. The resentment, the bitterness, the rage, all of it seemed strangely distant. Because standing before me wasn't a powerful man, wasn't a successful businessman, wasn't the husband who once controlled my emotions. He was simply a person facing the consequences of his own choices. And suddenly, I felt sorry for him. Not enough to forgive him, not enough to excuse him, just enough to understand that he had already lost far more than money. I took a slow breath. Then I answered, quietly, honestly. "I didn't destroy your life, Daniel." The words landed harder than any insult could have, because they were true. "You did." Silence followed, long silence. Daniel looked away. This time, he had no response. No argument, no defense, no manipulation, nothing. For the first time since I met him, he seemed completely powerless. Eventually, he turned and walked away. I watched him disappear through the courthouse doors, and strangely, I felt no desire to stop him, no desire for revenge, no desire for one final argument, just relief, because the chapter was finally over. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but completely. The marriage had ended, the lies had ended, the fight had ended, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in front of a building I never imagined I would own. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't an office tower. It wasn't anything particularly impressive from the outside. Just a modest brick building on a quiet street in Columbus. But to me, it represented something priceless, a new beginning. The sign above the door read, Second Chapter Women's Resource Center. The name made me smile every time I saw it, because that was exactly what this season of my life had become. A second chapter, not an ending, not a failure, a beginning. If someone had told me a year earlier that I would be standing there divorced at 58 and launching a nonprofit organization, I would have laughed. Not because I lacked ambition, because I never imagined my life would change so dramatically. Yet sometimes, the future arrives disguised as heartbreak. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us creates space for something better. That was certainly true for me. The first major decision I made after the divorce was selling the house. Many people thought I was crazy. After all, I had fought hard to protect it. But keeping it didn't feel right. Every room contained memories, some beautiful, some painful, all complicated. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life walking through a museum of old wounds. So I sold it. The process was emotional, far more emotional than I expected. Packing 30 years into boxes forces a person to confront the passage of time. Photographs, holiday decorations, old report cards, family keepsakes, tiny pieces of an entire life. Some days I cried. Some days I laughed. Some days I did both. But when the final box left the house, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because the memories disappeared, because they no longer owned me. After the sale, I purchased a smaller home closer to downtown. Simple, comfortable, peaceful. For the first time in decades, every decision belonged entirely to me. The furniture, the decorations, the schedule, the future, everything. The freedom felt strange at first, then wonderful. The idea for the resource center came from a conversation with Claire. A few weeks after the trial ended, we met for coffee. By then, our relationship had transformed completely. The woman I once blamed for destroying my marriage had become one of my closest friends. Life has a strange sense of humor. As we talked, Claire shared stories from women she knew. Women abandoned after divorce. Women forced to rebuild later in life. Women who felt invisible, forgotten, powerless. The story sounded familiar, because I had been one of those women. Eventually, I realized something important. The legal victory mattered. The financial settlement mattered. But what mattered most was helping other women understand their value before someone tried to take it away. That's how the idea began. Small workshops, support groups, financial education, career resources. Nothing extravagant, just practical help, real help. The kind of help I wish I had received during the darkest months of my life. Claire became involved almost immediately. She handled administrative operations, organized events, managed outreach programs. Her experience proved invaluable. More importantly, her heart was in the work, because she understood something many people didn't. Survival changes you, and helping others heal can become part of your own healing. Watching her rebuild her confidence became one of the greatest joys of my new life. The woman who once feared speaking against Daniel now stood confidently in front of groups of women sharing her story. Every time I saw it, I felt proud of her. Around that same time, another difficult conversation finally happened. Ethan called. For months after the trial, our relationship remained distant, polite, careful, painfully incomplete. Neither of us seemed to know how to bridge the gap. Then one Sunday afternoon, he asked if we could meet. I agreed. We met at a small park near my house. The same park where I used to take him when he was a child. Somehow that felt appropriate. The moment I saw him, I noticed how tired he looked. Not physically, emotionally. The guilt had been weighing on him for a long time. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he finally broke the silence. I'm sorry. 3 words, simple words, but honest ones. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time since the trial, I saw not the man who had disappointed me. I saw the boy I had raised, flawed, confused, human. I know. His eyes filled with tears. I should have said something. I nodded. Yes. The honesty seemed to surprise him. Perhaps he expected immediate forgiveness. Perhaps he feared complete rejection. Instead, I offered something more complicated. The truth. You hurt me. His shoulders dropped. I know. No, Ethan. My voice remained calm. You really hurt me. The tears finally came. For both of us. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. It wasn't easy. It wasn't magical. It didn't erase everything. But it was real. And sometimes, real is enough. Eventually, I forgave him. Not because he deserved it. Because carrying resentment was exhausting. Forgiveness, however, did not mean forgetting. I established boundaries. Healthy boundaries. Necessary boundaries. For the first time in my life, I understood the difference. And surprisingly, our relationship became stronger because of it. As for Daniel, I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. The financial investigations continued. Several business problems emerged. Some of his professional relationships deteriorated. The consequences were significant. Yet I rarely thought about him anymore. Not because I hated him, because he no longer occupied space in my future. That chapter was over. One afternoon, nearly a year after our divorce, I found myself standing alone inside the resource center after everyone had gone home. The building was quiet, peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the windows. I looked around at everything we had created, the workshops, the support programs, the women whose lives had changed, the friendships that formed, the confidence rebuilt, the hope restored. And suddenly I remembered something. The restaurant, the anniversary dinner, the words that had shattered my heart. Anyone can be replaced. I stood there smiling, not because the memory no longer hurt, because I finally understood how wrong Daniel had been. For months after hearing those words, I believed they defined me. Now I understood they only revealed him. People are not replaceable, not the ones who love deeply, not the ones who sacrifice, not the ones who build families, not the ones who stand beside others during difficult years. The truth is that those people are rare, and rare things are valuable. As I locked the front door that evening, another realization settled into my heart. Daniel had spent months trying to convince the world that I was replaceable. In the end, the opposite turned out to be true. The person who disappeared from my life wasn't me. It was him. I rebuilt. I healed. I moved forward. I found purpose. I found peace. I found myself. And in the life I created afterward, there was no longer a place for the man who once believed I could be replaced. Because the person who became unnecessary wasn't Tracy Spencer, it was Daniel. And that more than any courtroom victory was the greatest justice of all. If there's one lesson I learned from this journey, it's that your value does not decrease simply because someone fails to appreciate it. For years, I allowed my identity to become attached to my marriage. I believed that being a good wife meant sacrificing quietly, supporting endlessly, and expecting nothing in return. There is beauty in love and sacrifice, but there is danger in losing yourself completely inside another person's dreams. The truth is that many women spend decades building families, supporting careers, raising children, and holding everything together behind the scenes. Their work often goes unnoticed because it doesn't come with titles, awards, or public recognition. But invisible work is still work. Unseen sacrifices still matter. Another lesson I learned is that silence can be expensive. Sometimes we stay quiet because we want peace. Sometimes we stay quiet because we are afraid of conflict. Sometimes we stay quiet because we believe things will get better on their own. But there comes a moment when speaking the truth becomes more important than protecting someone else's comfort. I also learned that courage can come from unexpected places. The person I once believed was my enemy became one of my greatest allies. Life has a way of surprising us when we stop making assumptions and start paying attention to the truth. Most importantly, I learned that it is never too late to begin again. Whether you're 58, 68, or 88, your story is not over until you decide it is. A painful ending can become the first chapter of something beautiful. No matter what someone has called you, no matter how many times you've been underestimated, dismissed, or taken for granted, never let another person define your worth. You already have value. You always did. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. Have you ever been underestimated by someone you loved? Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal, divorce, or disappointment? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of strength, resilience, and hope. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I truly enjoy reading every comment and connecting with viewers from around the globe. Remember, your value is not determined by the people who fail to see it,